How does devotion transform into betrayal so devastating it ends in murder? What drives a music director, entrusted with uplifting worship, to take the life of the very man she once vowed to cherish? And where does faith falter when passion overpowers moral restraint? On a day that began with prayer and hymns, a horrifying secret about an affair with the church's pastor erupted, leaving a husband dead and an entire congregation's faith in tatters. Could anyone have foreseen that desire hidden in sacred spaces would spark this lethal finale? Welcome to True Crime Acts, where we look into the hidden truths behind some of the most chilling real-life events. Our mission is to uncover the stories that shock, educate, and spark change, reminding us that behind every headline is a victim, a family, and a ripple effect felt by an entire community. If you find this journey as important as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss another gripping exploration into the depths of human behavior. For years, the music director stood at the heart of this congregation, guiding the choir through spiritual anthems that stirred souls each Sunday. Her dedication to worship, coupled with a warm disposition, earned her the admiration of fellow church members. Whether leading choir practice or offering a comforting word, she was seen as a pillar of faith. In a community that prided itself on neighborly values and strong moral compasses, nobody suspected the private storm roiling in her personal life. Outside the choir loft, she balanced everyday responsibilities, a marriage anchored by routine, an image of respectability formed by her role in church leadership. As with many small-town stories, relationships were woven tightly, and personal boundaries could blur more easily than in larger cities. But under that tranquil exterior lay a secret that would crack the foundations of trust, not just in her marriage, but in the congregation as a whole. The friend she turned to for spiritual guidance was none other than the pastor himself. In the hush of counseling sessions or after-service chats, an unexpected connection grew. Soft confidences bloomed into emotional closeness, one that neither was prepared to handle responsibly. How could the music director and the pastor, both sworn to uplift hearts in a church setting, find themselves entangled in a bond that threatened so many lives, most critically, that of her unsuspecting husband? The pastor radiated a certain magnetic charm. Some credited it to the calling he served, while others saw it as a natural gift for persuasion. He was known to counsel troubled couples, settle petty disputes among members, and provide a spiritual anchor in times of community strife. There was solace in his voice, a gentleness that made people open up about their deepest worries. Yet behind closed doors, the pastor wrestled with his own vulnerabilities. In private moments, he admitted to feeling burdened by the expectations placed upon him, leading sermons, guiding souls, maintaining a spotless reputation. When he crossed paths with the music director in their shared passion for worship, it felt natural to form a deeper connection. At first, they discussed church matters, harmonies for Sunday's service, or how best to rouse the congregation's participation. Their fellowship soon turned personal. Late-night phone calls that began with talk of hymn selections drifted to intimate confessions. Shared laughter segued into affectionate banter. Each step along that secret path revealed a spark that risked the boundaries of their roles. Could the pastor and the music director see how precarious their rapport was becoming? Or were they convinced that the strength of their spiritual mission would shield them from moral repercussions? The husband, 40-something and modest, supported his wife's dedication to the church. He, too, participated in events, setting up chairs before Sunday classes, greeting newcomers, offering help where he could. Yet, as weeks passed, he noticed a subtle shift in his wife's behavior. She seemed distant, preoccupied during once-cherished family routines. Occasional attempts at conversation were met with clipped responses. When he pressed gently, she'd offer vague excuses about extra choir duties or deep counseling sessions with the pastor. At first, he wanted to believe her. After all, the pastor was known for late-night calls to members in distress. But the husband sensed something more personal brewing behind her weary gaze. A friend hinted that the music director was developing a worryingly close tie to the pastor, though they hesitated to label it an affair outright. The husband, torn between defending his wife's reputation and confronting the knot in his stomach, resolved to monitor the situation. He told himself it was merely a phase, that she might be overwhelmed by church responsibilities. In the background, the wife felt trapped between guilt and longing, each day weaving a larger lie that threatened her marriage. Was there a moment she could have halted the slide into betrayal by confiding in her husband? Or had the pull of secret passion grown too strong for honesty to break its hold? Despite their efforts to conceal it, the affair bloomed into something undeniable. Text messages, once carefully deleted, lingered in phone records. Shared glances in choir rehearsal drew concerned stares. One day, a member of the congregation accidentally stumbled upon their more intimate exchanges, left open on the pastor's phone. Alarmed and unsure how to proceed, they confided in another trusted believer, and the rumors soon gained traction among the curious. The final blow landed when the husband, increasingly suspicious, decided to check the phone logs. He found a string of calls and late-night texts between the pastor and his wife, some innocuous, others suggestive enough to confirm his worst fears. Confronting his wife, he demanded the truth. Tears streaming, she confessed to forming a bond with the pastor that escalated beyond mere friendship. Her apology landed like a sledgehammer on the trust he believed unbreakable. Furious, he vowed to bring the matter into the open, to challenge both the pastor and possibly the church's elders. Could the truth, once laid bare, have steered them toward repentance and reconciliation? Or did the pastor, terrified of losing everything, already prepare a darker means to silence the very man he'd betrayed? News of the affair spread swiftly, each retelling inflaming curiosity and moral outrage. Some longtime parishioners recalled feeling uneasy about the closeness between the music director and the pastor. Others defended them, unable to reconcile accusations with the unwavering support both had offered the congregation. The church, once unified in daily devotion, began to crack with doubt. The pastor, fearing condemnation, tried to frame the story as an overblown misunderstanding, preaching on themes of forgiveness from the pulpit with new urgency. The wife, meanwhile, found herself shunned by certain members who felt betrayed, while a few sympathetic peers offered silent, pained nods of understanding. Amid the swirl of shame and confusion, the husband stood resolute. Determined to confront the pastor face to face, he reached out for a private meeting, an appointment he believed might yield an apology, or at least a path to closure. But the pastor, cornered and fearing an explosive confrontation that could dismantle his entire ministry, wrestled with a dark dilemma. Would a heartfelt confession restore any measure of his standing, or had that door of redemption closed, leaving him with panic-driven thoughts that a more sinister option might protect his secret from final exposure? The husband, resolute, had arranged to meet the pastor privately that evening. On one side stood a man whose trust was betrayed, his life turned upside down by the wife's confession of a forbidden bond. On the other sat the pastor, anxiously searching for any plan to protect the position and image he had cultivated. Even so, part of him whispered that honest admission might yield some measure of redemption. But his mounting dread overshadowed that faint inclination toward truth, driving him to consider alternatives once unthinkable. As the hours crept by, the pastor stared at the phone. A part of him prayed the husband would cancel the meeting, but the call that finally came confirmed there would be no retreat. With trembling hands, he gathered a few items from a locked drawer. Documents, maybe something more ominous. Night had begun swallowing the last remnants of daylight when the pastor stepped outside to meet him. He repeated lines in his head about stepping down gracefully, asking for forgiveness, yet each mental script ended in the same paralyzing fear: an uprooted congregation, public humiliation, possibly the destruction of everything he'd built. Where once devotion guided him, desperation took hold. Meanwhile, the husband drove toward the church, hands locked on the steering wheel, anger tightly coiled in his chest. He pictured confronting the pastor face to face, demanding a direct apology, maybe even a confession that could salvage his marriage from the wreckage. Would the tension surging through each man find release in reasoned words? Or had the silent escalation of dread already sealed a path to irreversible harm? In that moment, none could guess that what awaited them was a fleeting spark that would leave one man lying in a pool of blood, and the other a prisoner of his own lethal choice. The husband approached with a firm stride, every ounce of heartbreak and fury etched on his face. The pastor tried to maintain composure, but the pounding of his heart echoed in his ears. Their initial words, terse and raw, held no pretense of politeness. In the space of a few breaths, accusations flared, both about the betrayal and how it jeopardized not just a marriage, but an entire congregation's faith. Tension escalated as the husband demanded the pastor's immediate resignation and a public admission of wrongdoing. The pastor offered excuses, half apologies, stumbling over claims that the bond was a momentary lapse or a confused emotional response. But each word only fed the husband's fury. A pointed remark from the pastor, suggesting the husband might be partially to blame for neglecting his wife, ignited the final spark. Witness accounts differ on who raised a fist first, but in the swirl of shouted insults, the pastor suddenly brandished the item he'd tucked away. The metallic glint under the parking lot's yellow light left no doubt. It was a gun. The husband froze. Perhaps he tried to dissuade the pastor or lunged to wrest it from him. The details remain hazy, overshadowed by the single, echoing shot that tore through the silence. In that thunderous moment, decades of piety collapsed. The husband staggered before falling to the ground, life ebbing from him in seconds. The pastor, weapon still in hand, stared at what he had wrought. Could any measure of regret or penance eradicate the magnitude of that second's decision? Or had his embrace of secrecy already charted a deadly course from which no redemption could be found? The news reverberated through the Alabama community by daybreak. A man who had once served as a spiritual guide was taken into custody, his face vacant with disbelief. Word traveled quickly. Some heard from tearful congregants. Others saw urgent local news bulletins that left them speechless. Heartbroken churchgoers arrived at the scene in the early hours, struggling to reconcile their daily experiences of piety with the bright police tape and the bullet casing markers. Many wept openly, hugging one another against the cold brutality of the truth. The wife, inconsolable, collapsed upon seeing the lifeless body of her husband, her screams piercing a dawn that should have been serene. Authorities wasted no time. The pastor was booked on suspicion of murder, official statements referencing a domestic dispute, aggravated by undisclosed personal entanglements. Investigators combed the pastor's phone and notes, seeking additional proof of how an affair spiraled into homicide. Meanwhile, the entire community braced for the avalanche of painful revelations. An affair behind the pulpit, a life cut short in the place meant for worship and trust. Could the weight of guilt overshadow the pastor's years of good deeds and empathetic counsel, or would the faithful find it impossible to cling to the memory of any sermon he once gave? In that collective numbness, people also asked themselves, had they overlooked the small cues, those fleeting looks, the suspicious behaviors, signs that might have triggered intervention and saved a husband's life? In the wake of the arrest, Cedar Glen's residents found themselves in endless debate. Some recalled the pastor's sermons about love and forgiveness, speechless that the man who once consoled them during hardships had taken such a monstrous turn. The wife's involvement fed gossip both sympathetic and accusing. People wrestled with the complexity of blame. Did the affair directly spark the killing, or did unspoken mental strains in the pastor's life push him over an edge only he could see? The wife, now reeling from the double blow of losing her husband and facing possible scrutiny for her role, retreated to a family member's home. Local rumor suggested she might attend the funeral under guarded stairs, some pitying, others openly condemning. It was said that she spent hours reading old text messages, consumed by regret at how easily flirtation had morphed into catastrophic betrayal. Meanwhile, the congregation tried to patch a gaping hole in leadership. Some advocated an outside pastor be brought in, one with no ties to the existing drama. Others questioned if they could continue to worship in a space where the air felt tainted by murder. The tragedy forced many to reevaluate the illusions they had about their moral guardians. As tension simmered, the question loomed, could an act of repentance or a profound apology from the pastor, perhaps a confession explaining his impulses, heal hearts torn by such staggering betrayal? Or had the stain of blood on sacred ground rendered every attempt at redemption futile, overshadowed by the brutality that ended an innocent life? The trial became a spectacle of broken vows and shattered trust. Prosecutors laid out a clear timeline, painting how an unwise affair and desperate fear of public scandal culminated in a fatal gunshot. Witness after witness recounted noticing subtle changes in the pastor, shifts in temperament, unexplained tension. Forensic evidence left little doubt. The bullet that ended the husband's life came from the pastor's gun, fired under circumstances that disputed any claim of self-defense. When the wife took the stand, tears confounded her words as she expressed remorse, insisting they never imagined a final confrontation would lead to murder. The pastor, visibly shaken, attempted to plead his case. He claimed to have feared for his life. But the jury, after deliberating on the evidence and context, remained unconvinced. The verdict came swiftly, guilty of murder. An Alabama judge handed down a lengthy prison term, marking a bitter end to a story that began with a quiet infatuation behind the pulpit. In the aftermath, the community wrestled with the scars left behind. A congregation once united in faith found itself rebuilding trust from the ashes of betrayal. Some believed the pastor's ultimate sin was letting vanity destroy his moral obligations, while others held that the secrecy itself sowed the seeds of violence. At last, we're left to ask, if those who champion virtue can succumb to lethal impulses, how can we guard ourselves from the destructive force of hidden passion and fragile pride? In this small Alabama community, the reverberations of one secret affair and the violence it sparked linger in the echoes of every prayer, every hesitant voice that dares to ask why. We at True Crime Acts invite you to reflect on this tragedy, on the power of honesty to prevent catastrophe, the danger of unchecked impulses, and the fragile lines between reverence and ruin. If you find our quest to expose these hidden truths imperative, please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to join us as we continue uncovering stories that remind us how swiftly faith and devotion can derail into devastation. Let us know in the comments, how can communities safeguard against the heartbreaking fallout of secrecy and fear?